Good morning, everyone. We are going to start talking about Lesson 3, the Plymouth Colony. Yesterday we talked about the Virginia colony and how it was set up and the reasons why it was set up, and that was basically to make money for king, country, and company, and they weren't so fantastic at it. Today we're going to look at the Plymouth colony. They are coming to the New World for decidedly different reasons. So we're going to start with vocabulary. And we have Pilgrim, Compact, Self-Government, and Majority Rule. John Smith explored the Atlantic coast in 1614, making maps of places he visited, and then he wrote a book, and it was a very influential book called A Description of New England. He described the area that now includes 6 states, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Called this area New England. Again, we're seeing that New Spain, New England, and this will continue on. The naming of these places in the New World is, well, silly. But that is New England, and we still call these states part of the New England area along with other states. People who read Smith's book became interested in coming to the New World. They wanted to seek money or religious freedom, and we've seen that consistently as we've gone through this chapter. Is the first thing they list is to make money and then to seek religious freedom, bring religion to the natives, those type of things. And what's going on in England at this time is King Henry VII has created the Church of England. The Church of England is in direct opposition to the Catholic Church. It is a separate movement within the church. And King Henry basically didn't like how much power the Pope had, how much say the Pope had. So King Henry decided, you know what? The best thing for me to do is to create my own church separate from the Catholic Church, thus removing a lot of power from the Pope. And in England, you either belong to the Church of England or you were punished. And we've seen that throughout this chapter also. So these pilgrims, also called separatists, wanted to follow their own religious beliefs. They did not want to be part of the Church of England. Pilgrim is someone who makes a journey for religious purposes. That still applies today. It's not just the people that dressed with black hats and buckles that we see in those paintings that we think of when we hear the word Thanksgiving. We see those pilgrims and we see those Native Americans. But a pilgrim is someone who makes a journey for religious purposes. The Pilgrims originally had gone to the Netherlands, but they didn't really appreciate the Dutch way of life. I don't know what it was about the Dutch, but they just didn't like it, and so they decided, the Virginia Company agreed to have the Pilgrims come to North America. New place, new way of life, new start. The Pilgrims were to pay with lumber and fur from the New World. So they weren't just getting a free ride. They had to do something. And so they agreed to come up with lumber. We've talked about that. England's an island. It has only X amount of space, X amount of trees. New World's much, much bigger. Lots and lots of trees. That's a resource that they can exploit and use. And furs from the New World. The Mayflower landed at Cape Cod, not Cape Cod, in Massachusetts, not Virginia as intended. All the men aboard signed a compact that they would have fair laws for the good of the colony. This is known as the Mayflower Compact. Signers promised to obey these laws. So again, this is that same idea. You had that House of Burgesses in the Virginia colony where those people were self-governing outside of England. The Mayflower Compact is doing the same thing here. They are setting up that self-governing body. They're making up their own rules separate from king and country. Just like I said, it allowed for self-government. The Mayflower Compact also stated that if half the people agreed to the law, then everyone had to follow it. So even if you had one person above that majority, everybody had to buy in. Just kind of like the world today. If we make a law, even if you disagree with that law, you are still subject to that law. Whether you agree with it, whether you voted for it or not, you are still subject to that law if it has passed. And the Mayflower Compact said 50% or more, it passes. A few weeks later, the Pilgrims founded Plymouth, where the land was good for farming. So this is definitely different than Jamestown, where they landed in a swamp. And there's our beautiful friend William Bradford, who was the governor of Plymouth. And you can see his quote: "Being thus arrived in a good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven." Even with a group of people that are probably a little bit better prepared than what you saw in the Virginia Company, you still had almost 50% of them die in that first winter. Samoset arrived in the spring with the message, "Hello, Englishmen," which probably freaked out some of those English people because he was Abenaki and had learned English from English sailors. And it would probably have been to see a native speaking English all of a sudden might have been a little creepy. But Samoset brought them to Squanto, who was the member of the Wampanoag tribe, to the Pilgrims. So he brought his people to the Pilgrims. And Squanto, he had some bad history. He had been enslaved by the Spanish. After he had escaped, he spent several years in England. But he did teach the Pilgrims how to plant squash, corn, pumpkins. He helped the Pilgrims trade for furs and neighboring tribes, and the Native Americans traded for metal goods that could be shaped for tools or jewelry. What you're seeing is he is doing the adult thing, which we've talked about before, that a lot of these people haven't necessarily done the adult thing. He's been enslaved by white people, and he is still helping this colony survive and thrive to meet their goals, to get that fur for the original reasons that the Pilgrims were sent there. He's helping them make it in the New World. Without Squanto, who knows if the Pilgrims would have been successful. But the Pilgrims still had very little food. Harvests were shared equally among the families. In 1623, leaders decided to divide the land between the colonists. This caused the people to work harder. So it makes sense. If I have a big group garden and all 30 of you are responsible for the entire garden, I may only have 1, 2, a few of you work, and then whatever those 1 or 2 of you reap, and so that's going to be shared among everyone. And so we can have someone, I don't know, say like Michael working really, really hard and Mackenzie working really, really hard, and you know, they're only 2 people, they can only cover so much ground and they can only get so much done. But then when it becomes harvest time, everybody gets a share of what Michael and Mackenzie has done. And when the leaders decided, okay, that's not how we're going to play anymore, we're going to break this up into 30 equal plots, you know, there's 30 of you, and now each of you are responsible for your own piece of land, and you only get what's on your piece of land. That's going to force all of you to work and start growing food, not just Michael and Mackenzie, who have got this thing, and they're going to be able to go forward a little bit easier because everybody's going to be responsible for themselves and not just relying on a few people, the whole community. So this is kind of almost that same idea, you don't work, you don't eat. It's just shifted a little bit, that I'm giving you your own land, and now you're responsible for feeding yourself because I've given you this land. This is your land for your responsibility. So amazingly, colonists become successful at farming, fishing, fur trading. New colonists come. Earlier colonists had goods ready to trade. However, it took a while to get going. So even after 10 years, there were only about 300 colonists. Remember, there was 102, and sure, the first 50 died in that first year. But even 10 years later, they only have 300 people. That's not a whole lot of growth. But what happens is kind of what happens in Virginia. You see these colonists start moving and start settling on land that they think is just open, which is really someone else's land, the Native Americans. And some of these Native Americans were not as friendly as Squanto and Samoset, and they didn't particularly like people moving onto the land. Kind of makes sense. And it resulted in fighting and the end of trade between the two groups. Fighting tends to end trade. William Bradford, that handsome devil we saw a few slides ago, who had worked with tribes, supported war to remove them from New England. So even though he was like, thanks for all the help, you've helped us survive for these last 10 years, you've really got us going and starting to flourish, but you gotta go. Less lands for tribes cause more fighting between native tribes for hunting grounds. So again, over and over when you see war, the losing group tends to be the Native Americans, and whether it ends up with them fighting the English, the Spanish, or even themselves, the Native Americans are losing. And that is lesson 3. Thanks, guys.